Hi friends, thank you for tuning in to our holiday special. I hope you are all having the best season thus far. I wanted to do something a little different from years past. During Victorian England, it was a Christmas tradition to gather the children around the fire, or by candlelight, and exchange stories of ghosts and spirits. After all, one of the most popular Christmas stories is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, which is a tale of ghosts. So I thought for some Yuletide cheer, I would tell you some allegedly true tales of Christmas past. So please sit back, relax, and let's dive in. We start tonight's tales with The Unwanted Christmas Guest. Alcatraz Penitentiary is located in the middle of California's San Francisco Bay and has quite the history. In its earlier days, Native Americans allegedly used the island to banish wrongdoers as punishment. They believed the island was plagued by local spirits. No one knows what happened to those left behind. Then, in 1934, Alcatraz, also referred to as the Rock, became a federal prison that housed criminals considered the worst of the worst, one of their most famous residents being Al Capone. The prison lasted for 20 years before closing its doors permanently. After its 1963 closure, Alcatraz was turned into not only a tourist destination, but a paranormal hotspot. Visitors today report disembodied screams, clanging of the heavy metal doors, and voices in the walls. The Rock has gained a reputation for unexplainable and shocking encounters. But one of the most notable stories of hauntings occurred before the island even shut its doors. Back in the 1940s, Alcatraz was under the control of Warden James Johnston, who at the time was known for prison reform. He spent a lot of his time in his position providing programs and changes to the prison population. Alongside his efforts in the prison, he also liked to show his appreciation for his staff. For Christmas one year, he organized a party at his boarding house on the island. He invited the guards, and they had an evening of merriment with food and good conversation. But the good times quickly stalled. The room suddenly turned cold, and the fire in the Ben Franklin stove extinguished. The men were frozen in place, as a phantom appeared seemingly out of nowhere. The phantom wore a gray suit paired with a brim cap. He also sported mutton chop sideburns. All the attendees could do was stare, unable to move. But just as suddenly as he appeared, the phantom man vanished. The party was unable to rebound after the visit from their unwanted guest. The guards and Warden Johnston were too rattled to continue, so the party ended. The warden didn't believe the tales of lost souls on the island, but he stated that night made him a believer. For years, many have speculated on the identity of the Phantom Man, since Alcatraz had a fair share of untimely and brutal deaths. Due to the appearance of the man's clothing, it was believed he was a working-class man, probably from the Victorian era. Only one death seemingly fits both the victim and time. The Nevada Democrat reported on January 21, 1857, a man named Michael Mann drowned off the coast of Alcatraz. The newspaper stated Michael and two of his associates were heading from Alcatraz to the North Beach in San Francisco when they got lost in the fog. While rowing for over an hour, they saw light from the lighthouse illuminating the night sky. Rather than continue to fumble in the dark, they turned back to head toward the light. As the group made their way to the lighthouse, several large waves struck the side of their small boat, causing it to overturn. Michael was lost in the confusion and never seen again. Anne Boleyn, home for the holidays. To set the scene, we need to have a little history lesson. Anne Boleyn was the second wife of Henry VIII, the King of England who reigned from 1509 until his death in 1547. Henry met Anne through her sister Mary, who at the time was a mistress to the king. Mary served as the lady-in-waiting to Catherine of Aragon, who was Henry's first wife. Henry was infatuated with Anne from the moment he met her, determined to make her his. But Anne denied his advances since she had no interest in being just another mistress. As briefly mentioned, Henry was married at the time, and in order to be with Anne, he needed to handle that. Henry pleaded with the Catholic Church to grant him an annulment from Catherine, since she was unable to produce a male heir. His request, however, was denied. Henry wouldn't take no for an answer, though. He then conjured up a plan to abandon his first marriage without the help of the church. In the winter of 1532, he enlisted the support of Francis I of Calais for his marriage with Anne. Immediately returning to Dover in England, Henry and Anne married in secrecy. Without the blessing of the church, Henry married Anne in a public ceremony in London on January 25, 1533. She soon became pregnant with their first child. This action went on to sever England's relationship with the Catholic Church in Rome. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, assisted Henry in his annulment from Catherine, so Anne could officially take her place as queen. On May 23, 1533, Thomas declared the marriage between Catherine and Henry null and void, on the basis that the union was blighted in the eyes of God, because she was his sister-in-law. Therefore, they were unable to conceive an heir. 5 days later, Thomas declared the marriage of Anne and Henry valid. On June 1, 1533, Anne was officially crowned. By September 7, 1533, she gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth. In the beginning, the marriage was blissful, but it quickly fell apart. Much like with Catherine, Henry sought a male heir with Anne. They had trouble conceiving, so Henry continued to keep mistresses on the wayside. Unlike Catherine, Anne wouldn't turn a blind eye to her husband's infidelity. Anne was furious with Henry, but he didn't care. In fact, by this point, he was moving on from Anne, with his eyes set on his next would-be bride, Jane Seymour. Gossip around the castle targeted Anne, accusing her of witchcraft, adultery, and conspiracy against the king. King Henry opted to listen to these rumors since he wanted his second marriage to end. King Henry formally charged Anne for her crimes against the crown, and she was sentenced to execution. On May 19, 1536, Anne was beheaded. Since her death, Anne's spirit is alleged to be in many places, but most notably at her childhood home. Hever Castle, located in Kent, was the home of the Boleyn family. Reports state on Christmas Eve, a somber specter can be seen slowly gliding across the bridge over the River Eden towards the castle. Many believe this is Anne, since it is where she was said to be happiest. The Mistletoe Bride. In the early 17th century, the daughter of John Copes was engaged to be married to a man named Lord Lovell, a young, wealthy nobleman. Her father owned the Bramshill House in Hampshire, England, and felt his daughter's ceremony should be nothing short of elegant. The engagement happened weeks before Christmas, so John had the idea of hosting both the wedding and Christmas Day celebrations at the same time. Weddings were about merrymaking and feasting, and the wedding at Bramshill was said to be the greatest, with the most distinguished guests from all over. The food was lavish and plentiful, with musicians playing all evening in the galleries. After dinner, there was dancing and music in the Great Hall, but the young bride soon grew weary. Weddings at the time had strange traditions, such as guests fighting over the bride's intimate apparel, and before the guests left for the evening, they were to carry the bride to the bedchamber. Rather than moving on to what was next, the bride decided to gather her husband and a few other partygoers and proposed they play a game of hide-and-seek. The rules were simple. A girl hides, and the first man to find her has the privilege of kissing her. The bride offered to go first, asking the guests to give her 5 minutes to hide. Then after, she told them to come find her. So all the guests turned away, and the bride disappeared. When time was up, the hunt was on. Lord Lovell was anxious to be the first to find his bride, but Lord Lovell and the search party were unsuccessful in finding her. They laughed it off thinking she was clever, but after hours passed, they quickly realized it was a serious matter. Everyone from the party joined in the search, combing every inch of the sprawling mansion. But as the evening continued, the young bride was still missing. Many of the guests left, but Lord Lovell and John Cope continued to search. Rumors from guests felt the bride must have run away, but Lord Lovell felt his wife wouldn't do such a thing. He was sure something tragic occurred. Days turned to weeks, and weeks to years, and the bride was never heard from again. Lord Lovell spent his life searching for his lost bride, even refusing to leave Bramshill since it was the last place he saw her. Lord Lovell grew old, and some 50 years passed before he finally discovered what became of his bride. One day, while in the room on the top floor, Lord Lovell ran his hand across the oaken paneling when he touched a spot of elaborately carved woodwork by accident. The paneling flew open and revealed a secret closet. Within this closet was an ancient oak chest, iron-bound and dusty. It was a storage for important documents. Lord Lovell felt he was close to the end of his long search, so he found tools to pry open the chest. He lifted the heavy lid and was face to face with the body of his bride. Now a skeleton, still dressed in the beautiful wedding robes he last saw her in, just yellowed with age. It became clear to Lord Lovell that his wife wanted to puzzle the search party by stepping into the chest. The lid closed behind her, and she was unable to open it. The scratch marks on the lid showed she died in an agonizing way. It's unclear why no one heard the poor bride's cries, but it was believed the odor of decomposition was non-existent, since the chest was located on the top floor of the home and near the chimney. The warmth would have carried the smell away. Lord Lovell died just weeks after the discovery. For many years after, the chest was left on display at Bramshill, but was eventually passed on to Edna Hilton, the wife of Captain Denzil Cope. After the chest was in the possession of Edna and Denzil, the reports of strange occurrences began. Guests in their home were kept up at night by stifled moans of a woman who seemed to be in agony. They claimed they would hear muffled sounds and someone hitting on the inside of the interior of the thick wooden chest. Another woman reported that during the night, she had the most terrifying experience. Shortly before midnight, she was awakened suddenly with a sensation that she was not alone in the bedroom. Then, from behind the ancient oak paneling, she heard the noises of light, hurrying footsteps. The moans terrified her so much that she passed out, only regaining consciousness the following morning. She made an excuse and left the castle as soon as possible. Not long after this experience, a servant also shared an experience that made him suddenly depart. The man stated in the stillness of the night he heard the clatter of bony feet hurrying up the stairway into the attic. Later, a muffled thump was heard, comparing it to the sound of the heavy chest falling shut. The story of the Mistletoe Bride has appeared in different media versions throughout the years, including novels, plays, and poems. The murder of David Fee. On Christmas Eve 1890, David Fee was set to meet his parents for Christmas Mass. He donned white robes and a child's trumpet around his neck with plans to attend a party after. David was described as a model citizen. He was an active volunteer, former firefighter, and well-liked socialite. He was a shopkeeper in Nanaimo, but returned to Victoria to be with his parents for Christmas. Everyone had something good to say about David. That evening, as David left the church, he was accompanied by a friend named Frank Patridge. As the two walked away from the church, they were suddenly accosted by a figure who stated, "I challenge you," before raising a gun and firing. The midnight Catholic Mass was suddenly interrupted by the blast outside. A small group of worshippers rushed out to see what the commotion was, but were met with the sight of David on the ground in a pool of blood. David died at the scene from a gunshot wound to the chest. The shot was so close, it left him covered in powder burns. The Victoria police chief was at the Mass at the time and heard the shot. They quickly spread out to canvass the neighborhood, hoping to find the culprit. But all they discovered was the gun used in the shooting, abandoned by a nearby house, the right barrel still warm. The murder of David was odd, since he had no debts, no enemies, but yet seemed to be the target of an assassination. However, the motive would come swiftly. 2 hours after the shooting, a disheveled young man entered the city's police barracks and confessed to the officer on duty. He was described as being a medium build and possessing an Irish accent. The man was 33-year-old Clarence Phelan, and he declared, "I am the man that shot a man tonight." He was noticeably drunk, but officers took his statement. It turned out the attack was exactly what police described, but David Fee was not the intended target. Clarence was after another man, Thomas Deasy, who was known for wearing a white raincoat. According to Clarence, the cornerstone of the current St. Andrew's Cathedral was laid 2 months prior, and a dispute over a flag had caused tensions between the site managers and the predominantly Irish-American construction crews. A Union Jack, U.S., and Irish flag were raised over the site of the future cathedral, but Thomas had reportedly ordered the takedown of the flags as he felt it openly advocated for Irish independence from Great Britain. Statements from the other workmen alleged the incident caused Clarence to vow revenge against Thomas. So Clarence explained he picked up a shift to guard the construction site on Christmas Eve because he knew Thomas would be at Mass at the old Catholic cathedral next door. Clarence said the murder was a big misunderstanding. When he surrendered himself, he claimed, "I fired a shot, but I am no murderer." Clarence was ultimately arrested and charged with the murder of David Fee. A jury found him guilty of manslaughter, claiming he was a reckless drunk. They sentenced him to life of penal servitude, but he was released from duty within 10 years. David Fee was buried in Ross Bay Cemetery. According to visitors and paranormal enthusiasts, David's ghost can be seen around his tomb, with a red blotch on his chest. He has also been reported hanging around outside of the church where his life came to an end. His story has become part of the ghost tours where visitors and guides alike describe the feeling of apprehension in the area. The Terror on Clinton Avenue. In December of 1878, a man named Edward F. Smith entered the police station on Myrtle Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. He seemed erratic, exhausted even, as he explained to the officer on duty he was questioning his own sanity. And the police were not ready to believe his tale. Edward claimed the past few weeks himself and his family, a wife and 2 small daughters, were being terrorized by unseen forces. He explained he was a skeptic to the paranormal, but he was convinced a phantom was living inside of his home on Clinton Avenue. Edward was wide-eyed and pleaded with the officers to help him and his family. They didn't know what else to do or where else to turn. He reported that someone or something harassed his family every night, several times a night, by ringing their doorbell and banging loudly on their door. Edward claimed when he opened the door, no one was there. But perhaps the most terrifying was in regards to his dining room. The kitchen was separated from the dining room by a set of heavy double doors. At random times throughout the night, these doors would violently shake as if someone were trying to rip them off the hinges. Edward knew he seemed mental, but was desperate. The police saw a citizen in need and decided to entertain Edward's delusions, because at minimum, they'd at least have a good story to tell around the office. Detective Price and a few other officers arrived at the home on 136 Clinton Avenue on a cold December evening. Upon arrival, they first carried out a detailed inspection of the doorbell. They checked to see if there were any wires, springs. After speaking to the family and getting similar accounts as they had from Edward, officers took watch of different areas in the home. One officer was instructed to wait by the door to open it as soon as the bell rang, and another was instructed to wait by the dining room to pounce on the prankster as soon as the door was opened. The daughters were sent to bed, while the Smiths entertained their guard watch, anticipating what was to come. Just as it had the previous nights, the doorbell suddenly rang. The officers jumped into action, with the one by the front door swiftly pulling it open, but rather than a young prankster, they were greeted by emptiness. The officer from the dining room glanced from his hiding spot and also saw nothing. The officer in charge of the door was puzzled. He explained to the group in waiting that, although no one was present, when he opened the door, he felt a freezing gust of wind as if someone rushed past him. The officers were ordered to spread out and canvass the area outside, but no one was found. The doorbell was inspected once more, but again, nothing. Empty-handed, officers reported back to the Smiths, but as their debrief began, it was interrupted by the banging of the heavy doors in the dining room. The shaking was so violent, the occupants of the house thought the walls would crumble around them. But just as it started, it quickly faded, and the house was silent again. Confused but still convinced they had a would-be intruder, the officers decided to mix flour and ashes and sprinkle them on the floor near the door. If someone was approaching the door, they would catch their footprints. With their trap set, the officers took their post again and waited. Not long after experiencing the doors, the doorbell chimed once more. The front door was again ripped open, and they were greeted by the dark. Except this time, they had their backup plan. The ashes were inspected where they anticipated answers, but were plagued with more questions. The ashes were left undisturbed. Just as soon as the officers inspected their trap, 3 loud knocks reverberated off the open front door. The officer in charge of the door stared into the vast darkness, trying to see if anything stood on the porch. As he stared out, a brick crashed through the living room window and landed on the floor in front of them. Officers and the Smiths alike peered outside where they saw no one on the street. By this point, the officers were out of options and, quite frankly, scared. So they left the home and the Smiths to deal with their problem on their own. After a visit from authorities, the house on Clinton Avenue became the center of gossip. Neighbors and strangers from all over Brooklyn would stand on the sidewalk gawking at the house, hoping to catch a glimpse of the alleged paranormal activity. The Smiths learned to live with the noises. Edward muffled the bell by wrapping it up and jamming it with a cloth. They reported as the weeks passed on, the activity in their home lessened, and only months after it started, they reported only light tappings could occasionally be heard. The hauntings on Clinton Avenue were soon forgotten by the public. A newspaper article from December 21, 1878, reported that Edward solved his problem on his own. Allegedly, he believed it was the devil himself, and after some praying, the activity halted altogether. At the time, locals suggested the hauntings were caused by a lawyer who allegedly took his life in the house. 136 Clinton Avenue still stands today. Christmas at the Crescent. I found this story after I'd finished my script, and since we've previously discussed the hauntings and history of the Crescent Hotel, I wanted to include this one as well. If you haven't seen that video, I will include it as a pop-up in case you're interested. But as a recap, the Crescent Hotel is known for being one of the most haunted hotels in the United States. It is located along the northern border of Arkansas near the Ozark National Forest. Throughout its long history, it's been plagued with tragedy, which makes it the home for lots of lost spirits. Or so they say. There are many stories revolving around ghostly residents and the estate in general, but one particular story astonished visitors. During Christmas, the staff of the Crescent put up a large tree in celebration of the season. Visitors come from far and wide to view the holiday spectacle, but during one year, the unexplainable happened. The tree and its presents were placed on one side of the great room, but every new day, staff and visitors would come in, and the tree and all of its presents would mysteriously move to the other side of the room. Although many felt the staff were playing some trick, they denied having any involvement. In addition to the tree being moved, reports of ghosts dressed in Victorian-era clothing were seen wandering nearby. This all was seemingly confirmed when the hotel staff returned to work the following day, just to find the tree and its gifts exactly where they were supposed to be, back on the other side of the room. Hi friends, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays for those who do not celebrate. Please leave your thoughts below and we can chat about these ghostly tales, and if you found this to be interesting, please consider giving the video a thumbs up to let YouTube know you want more from me. And lastly, if you're not subscribed yet, we would love to have you under the ash tree. I say it every time, but I'm very thankful for my little corner on YouTube, and I wouldn't be here without you all. So stay safe this holiday season, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye friends!